The stars looked calm and endless as the Earthship Eclipse drifted into orbit above the alien world of Zelrai Prime. Captain James Ralston stood near the viewing glass, staring at the blue and silver planet below. This mission was unlike any other. He was not here to fight or conquer. He was here to speak, to make peace and to prove that humanity was not what the galaxy believed it to be. The Zelrai Empire was ancient, powerful, and proud. They had never trusted humans. To them, Earth was young and impulsive. Yet now the Queen herself had invited a human ambassador. James knew this was his one chance to show that humans could be something more than ambitious explorers. His ship landed in the royal docking bay. As the ramp lowered, he saw the first glimpse of the Zelrai. They were tall and graceful, with shining eyes and faint marks of color running along their faces. Their armor shimmered faintly, made of materials unknown to humans. The guards stood still and silent as James walked forward, carrying no weapon, only a translator device and the small insignia of the Human Federation. His uniform was plain, his movements calm. He bowed slightly, remembering every lesson about alien respect rituals. An officer guided him through wide crystal halls toward the throne chamber. The place glowed with soft blue light, walls alive with moving patterns that seemed to breathe. At the end of the hall stood Queen Thalara, her presence commanding yet calm. Beside her stood her daughter, Princess Lizra. The Queen's eyes studied James sharply. She was not cruel, but her gaze carried the weight of centuries of leadership. Lizra, on the other hand, looked curious but cold. Her silver hair framed a face that had seen too many mistakes from outsiders. The Queen spoke first. "Human," she said, her voice deep and even. "You come as a representative of your species. Tell me why we should listen." James bowed again. "Your Majesty, I come not to demand but to understand. The stars are vast, and if our species meet only through fear, then both of us will lose more than we gain." The hall was silent. Some of the courtiers murmured softly, surprised at his tone. The Queen's expression did not change, but she leaned back slightly. Lysira folded her arms, unimpressed. "Words are easy," she said. "We have heard many from those who come from the stars." James turned his head toward her and smiled gently. "Then I will not ask you to believe my words. I will ask you to judge my actions." Over the next few days, James was shown the capital city. He observed their customs, their science, their art. Everywhere he went, Zelrai citizens stared at him with suspicion. To them, humans were fragile, too emotional, too eager to prove themselves. James did not argue or defend himself. He simply listened. When asked questions, he answered with honesty. When mocked, he smiled. He knew that change did not come through pride, but through patience. On the third day, as he walked through the lower districts, an accident struck. A small child, curious about the human visitor, had climbed too close to an unstable energy spire. The spire began to shake, emitting dangerous sparks. The guards shouted warnings, but before anyone could move, James ran forward. He grabbed a nearby metallic plate, shielding the child as the spire collapsed. The explosion of light sent both tumbling to the ground. When the smoke cleared, James was burned and bruised, but the child was unharmed. Citizens gathered around in shock. The human had risked his life for one of them. Lysira, who had been observing from a distance, rushed forward. She knelt beside him, helping him stand. "Why did you do that?" she asked, confusion mixed with something else, something like respect. James coughed lightly but smiled. "Because the child was in danger. That's reason enough." Lysira stared at him for a long moment, then turned to the people. "Get the medics," she ordered. Her voice was firm, and for the first time it did not sound cold. Later in the royal infirmary, Queen Thalara came to see him. James was sitting up, his arm bandaged. The Queen's eyes were softer now, though still watchful. "You endangered yourself for one of my people," she said. "You could have died," James nodded. "It would have been a fair trade if it saved a life." The Queen was silent. Then she turned and left, but Lysira stayed behind. She looked at the human with new eyes. "You act strangely for your kind," she said. "Most beings do not risk themselves for others." "Maybe we're still learning what it means to be better," James replied. That night, rumors spread through the palace. The human was not weak. He was brave. He had acted without hesitation. The story reached the Queen's Council and even the outer cities. Some began to question what they had been told about Earth. Others warned that it was only a trick. The Empire had always believed that strength was the only truth. But what if compassion was another kind of strength? The next morning, Queen Thalara invited James to a council meeting. The chamber was filled with high-ranking advisors, each representing a world under the Empire's rule. The Queen announced that the human would be tested in the traditional way, to prove that his courage was real, not a story. It was called the Trial of Strength. No alien outsider had ever passed it. The Queen's tone made it clear, this was not punishment but an opportunity. If he succeeded, the Empire would listen. If he failed, humanity would be dismissed as weak pretenders. James accepted without hesitation. Lysera tried to hide her concern, but her eyes betrayed her feelings. She approached him after the meeting, her voice low. You don't understand what you've agreed to. The trials are not about muscle or weapons. They are about endurance of spirit, James smiled. Then maybe I'll fit right in. She frowned at his calmness. Why do you trust so easily? Don't you fear failure? Of course, he said softly. But fear doesn't change what needs to be done. Over the next 2 days, preparations were made for the trial. James trained in the royal courtyard, not with weapons, but with patience and observation. He studied the challenges from old records, learning how each task tested not power but wisdom. Lysera found herself drawn to watch him. She saw how he moved, not like a soldier, but like someone who respected what he faced. She began to see the truth in his words. Humans were not perfect, but they were growing. They were trying. On the evening before the trial, Lysera met him on the balcony overlooking the glowing city. The sky shimmered with floating lights and distant ships. For the first time, her tone was gentle. If you fail, my mother will close the gates to your world forever. I know, James said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. But if I don't try, then she's already closed them. Lysera looked at him silently. The cool air carried the faint hum of the city. In that quiet moment, she realized something she had never thought possible. She wanted him to succeed. Not for politics, not for her empire, but because she believed he deserved it. As the night deepened, James returned to his quarters. He looked out at the alien stars, wondering how humanity must look to these beings, small, impulsive, untested. But he also knew that the greatest strength of humans was not their power, but their will to rise after every fall. Tomorrow he would not fight to prove humans superior. He would fight to show that they could be equals. Far away in her private chamber, the Queen spoke softly to one of her advisors. The human has courage, she said. But courage without wisdom is danger. The advisor bowed. And if he has both, my queen? Then perhaps, she said after a pause, we have underestimated his kind. The stars outside shimmered brighter that night. Somewhere between fear and hope, 2 worlds began to change. The next morning came with a quiet sense of tension that spread across the royal city. The trial of strength had not been held for many years, and now it would be done again, not for one of their own, but for a human. The people gathered in the grand arena, their voices low and full of curiosity. Many believed the human would fail. Others came only to witness what kind of creature would dare face a challenge meant for warriors of the Zelrai Empire. Captain James Ralston stood in the center of the arena. The ground beneath his boots was smooth and metallic, glowing faintly with blue light. The air felt heavy, filled with expectation. Across from him stood 3 tall figures wearing ceremonial armor. They were not enemies, but guardians of the test. Their job was not to fight him, but to judge him. Queen Thalara watched from her throne at the top of the arena, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. Beside her stood Princess Lysera, her heart uneasy. She had told herself not to care, but she could not stop her eyes from following every movement of the human below. The Queen raised her hand, and the crowd fell silent. Her voice echoed through the chamber. Captain James Ralston of Earth, you will face 3 trials. Each will test a different kind of strength. The first is endurance, the second is wisdom, and the third is spirit. You may refuse at any time, but if you do, your people's words will hold no weight before this court. James nodded respectfully. I understand, Your Majesty. I accept the challenge. The first trial began. The floor of the arena shifted, revealing a field of rising pillars surrounded by streams of glowing plasma. The air grew hot, the heat pressing against his skin. He was to cross the field without the use of weapons or shields, relying only on instinct and will. The first few steps were easy, but the heat grew stronger with every move. The pillars were far apart, forcing him to leap from one to another. Each time he landed, the surface shifted slightly under his weight. He had to balance carefully, using both strength and focus. The Zelrai were built for this kind of test. Their limbs longer, their muscles denser. But James was human. His body trembled, his breath came heavy, and his uniform stuck to his skin from the heat. The crowd murmured as he slowed down. Some laughed softly, expecting him to fall, but James did not stop. He took his time, studying each jump before he made it. His movements were not perfect, but they were smart. He began to use his surroundings, leaning his weight to steady the next jump, sliding instead of landing hard, saving energy instead of wasting it. When he finally reached the end, the crowd was silent. The guards nodded with quiet approval. The Queen spoke again. "The first trial is complete. Few finish with such control." She turned to her daughter. "Your thoughts, Princess?" Lysira tried to hide her smile. "He learns fast." James stood breathing deeply, sweat running down his face, but his eyes were bright. When the second trial began, the ground shifted again. This time, walls rose around him, forming a maze of moving panels filled with strange symbols. A voice echoed through the air, mechanical and calm. "Solve the pattern or the path will close." The challenge was not of strength, but of logic. The symbols glowed in sequences, and James had to find the correct order to keep the walls from closing in. His translator could not help him now. This was not language, but logic of the Zelrai mind. He crouched down, studying the symbols, remembering what Lysira had told him before the trial. "Our logic flows like water. It repeats, it bends, but it never breaks." He used that advice. Instead of forcing a pattern, he followed the rhythm of the lights, pressing the panels in a flowing sequence. The maze began to move in response, opening narrow paths ahead. Each time he chose wrong, the wall shifted closer. The crowd watched in tense silence. He had no map, no clue where the end was. Still, he trusted his instincts and the advice of the princess. Minutes stretched into hours. Even the Queen leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Finally, after one last sequence of glowing patterns, a beam of light shot upward, marking the end of the maze. The walls opened, revealing James standing in the center, his face calm, his mind steady. The Queen's voice carried across the arena again. "The second trial is complete. The human shows not only strength but also thought. Impressive." Lysira looked at her mother but said nothing. Her heart felt light, and for a moment she allowed herself a small, proud smile. Now came the final trial, the trial of spirit. This one was the hardest of all, because it could not be fought with strength or solved with logic. It tested courage and the truth of one's heart. The arena darkened. The lights dimmed until only James stood in a faint circle of glow. From the shadows, figures began to appear, not real bodies, but projections shaped from energy. They took forms from his memories, his fears, his failures. He saw faces of those he had lost in war, of friends who had doubted his mission, of voices that told him humans were nothing but reckless wanderers. Each figure spoke words that echoed in his mind. "You cannot change what you are. You are too small for this galaxy. You will fail." James closed his eyes. His heart raced. The voices grew louder. He knew this test was not physical, it was emotional, a reflection meant to break the spirit. For a moment, doubt pressed against him like a heavy weight. He thought of his home, of Earth, of the people who believed in him. He thought of the Queen watching, of the princess who had trusted him enough to give advice. Slowly he took a deep breath and spoke softly. "You may be right," he said to the illusions. "Maybe I am small. Maybe humans still have much to learn, but we do not stop. That's what makes us human." The illusions began to fade. The air grew calm again and the arena filled with light. James stood tall, silent but steady. The trial was over. Queen Thalara rose from her throne. The entire arena fell quiet as her voice rang clear. "The human has completed the 3 trials. He has shown endurance, wisdom, and spirit. By the laws of the Zelrai, he has proven his worth." The crowd erupted in sound, some cheering, others murmuring disbelief. The Queen looked down at James. Her expression was no longer distant, but thoughtful, almost proud. "You have done what few of my own have done," she said. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than I believed." James bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I did not come to prove humans better. I came to show that we can stand beside you." For a moment, even the Queen said nothing. Then she turned and left the arena, her robe trailing behind her. The crowd parted as she passed, silent once more. Lysera hurried down to the arena floor, her steps light. When she reached James, she stopped, unsure of what to say. "You did it," she finally said. "I didn't think anyone could pass all three," he smiled. "You helped more than you know." She looked down, trying to hide the warmth in her expression. "My mother will never admit it, but she respects you now. The council will speak of this for years." As they walked together toward the exit, Lysera glanced up at him. "What will you do now?" "Whatever helps build peace," he said. "I don't want this to be the end. I want it to be a beginning." Lysera nodded slowly. "Then maybe it can be." When they left the arena, the night sky of Zelrai Prime was filled with lights. Ships floated like stars above the city, and for the first time in many generations, the people spoke of hope. The human who had faced the trials had not come as a conqueror or a beggar. He had come as an equal. From her private balcony, Queen Thalara watched them go. Her thoughts were deep and unreadable. "Perhaps," she whispered to herself, "this human is the kind of warrior the stars have been waiting for." She turned away, her gaze lingering on her daughter, who walked beside the human with quiet pride. The queen's mind was already turning toward the future, wondering what new path had just begun for her empire and for her child. Far below, unaware of how much had already changed, James Ralston looked toward the stars and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, humanity had taken its first true step among the stars. The next few days after the trial of strength passed quietly, but the air around the Zelrai Palace was full of whispers. People spoke of the human who had faced the ancient trials and survived. Some called it luck. Others said it was destiny. Whatever the reason, the name Captain James Ralston was now known across the empire. Queen Thalara had allowed him to stay as a guest in the royal residence, though many of her advisors disagreed. They feared that humans were unpredictable and too ambitious. Yet the queen had seen something during the trials that she could not ignore. She had seen courage without arrogance. Still, her trust was cautious. James spent his days learning from the scholars and engineers of the Zelrai. He studied their technology and culture, always careful to show respect. The Princess Lysera often joined him, though she pretended it was only to ensure he did not break any customs. In truth, she enjoyed their conversations. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, open-minded, humble, and quietly determined. One evening, as they walked through the crystal gardens, the glow of the plants made their surroundings look like stars. Lysera spoke softly. "You changed the minds of many, human. Even my mother sees you differently now." James smiled faintly. "Change takes time. I didn't come to impress anyone. I just wanted to prove that we can stand beside you, not against you." Lysera looked at him curiously. "You really believe humans in Zelrai could ever share that kind of trust?" "I believe it starts with one person willing to try," he said. Before she could reply, the sound of an explosion echoed in the distance. The ground shook beneath their feet. Guards ran past them, shouting into their communicators. Lysera turned pale. "That came from the lower hangars," she said. "That's the Queen's fleet." Without hesitation, James followed her. When they reached the hangars, they saw smoke rising from a destroyed docking bay. Several ships had been damaged and alarms filled the air. The Queen's personal guard was already there, shouting orders. James noticed something strange. The explosion had not come from the outside. The damage pattern showed it had started inside. Lysera looked at him with alarm. "This isn't an accident," he nodded grimly. "It's sabotage." Before they could say more, one of the Queen's generals approached, his face hard. "The Queen demands your presence immediately, Princess Lysera, and the human as well." They hurried to the throne chamber where Queen Thalara stood surrounded by advisors. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with anger. "We have confirmed," she said coldly, "that a group of officers within our own fleet caused the explosion." "They call themselves the Obsidian Guard," Lysera frowned. "Mother, the Obsidian Guard was disbanded years ago." "So we thought," Thalara replied. "They believe that allying with humanity will destroy our empire. Their leader, Commander Serac, has vanished." James listened carefully. "If he's still in the city, he'll try again." The Queen looked at him, her tone sharp. "You speak as if you know his mind." "I've seen this before," James said calmly. "Fear makes people desperate. They'll strike again soon before you can act." The Queen studied him for a long moment, then turned to her daughter. "You will accompany the human. Find this Commander Serac. Bring me proof of his betrayal." Lysera hesitated. Mother, if the Obsidian Guard is active again, they will be armed and dangerous. I cannot risk. The Queen raised her hand. You are my heir. You will not hide while traitors move against us. There was no more to say. Within an hour, Lysera and James were moving through the shadowed lower city, guided by a small group of loyal guards. The streets were narrow and dim, the air filled with the hum of power conduits. As they searched, James noticed the way Lysera moved, cautious but confident, her eyes always scanning for danger. At one point, they passed a group of citizens whispering about the explosion. James could feel the unease in the air. Your people are afraid, he said quietly. They fear losing control, Lysera replied. Our empire has been strong for so long that change feels like weakness. They continued until they reached an abandoned storage complex near the city's edge. The guards spread out, checking the area. Inside, they found signs of activity, tools, weapons, and strange energy marks on the walls. Lysera touched one of them. Serac was here. This is military-grade plasma. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A voice echoed from above. You shouldn't have come here, Princess. Lysera spun around. On the upper platform stood Commander Serac, his armor dark and marked with the symbol of the Obsidian Guard. His voice carried pride and bitterness. You bring a human into our sacred halls and you dare call yourself Zelrai. Lysera lifted her chin. You call yourself loyal, yet you strike against your queen. The queen has lost her way, Serac said. The human is poison. He will bring weakness, and weakness will bring ruin. James stepped forward. You're afraid of something you don't understand. That's not strength, Commander. That's fear, Serac sneered. And what would you know of strength, human? Enough to know it's not about domination, James replied. It's about courage to face the unknown. Before Serac could respond, a loud alarm blared through the building. The guards shouted as hidden drones activated from the shadows, the air filled with the hum of energy weapons. Lysera and James ducked behind cover as bolts of blue light struck the walls around them. Ambush! One of the guards shouted. Lysera pulled a small device from her belt, projecting a shimmering shield between them and the attackers. They were waiting for us, she said through gritted teeth. James looked around, scanning the area. He noticed a weak spot in the roof's structure. If we overload that beam, the drones will lose power. It's connected to their control relay. She gave him a quick look. You think you can do it? I can try, he said with a small smile. While Lysera drew the drone's attention, James ran toward the control beam. He used his wrist device to reroute the power flow. Recalling what he had learned from the Zelrai engineers, sparks flew as he connected the wires. A moment later, the lights dimmed and the drones froze midair, their systems failing. Serac shouted in anger from above. You think this changes anything, human? You've only delayed what's coming. Before he could escape, Lysera activated her communicator. Within seconds, royal security forces arrived, surrounding the complex. Serac was taken into custody, still shouting that the queen had betrayed her people. Later that night, Queen Thalara stood in the council chamber, listening as her daughter explained everything. James remained silent beside her. When Lysera finished, the queen nodded slowly. You have done well, both of you. Serac's rebellion had failed, but his words lingered in the minds of many. The queen knew that unity could not be forced. It had to be earned. She turned to James. You warned us this would happen. You understand the hearts of those who fear? James replied quietly, Fear is universal, Your Majesty, but so is hope. The queen looked at her daughter, then back at him. You have brought both danger and clarity to my court, human, and you have shown my daughter what true strength looks like. Lysera met her mother's gaze, unsure of how to respond. She had seen bravery before, but not like this. The human had risked his life without hesitation, not for glory, but for what he believed was right. That night, as the palace grew quiet, Lysera found herself standing on the same balcony where they had spoken before. The stars shimmered brightly above. James joined her, his expression calm but thoughtful. You were right, she said softly. Trust begins with one person willing to try. He smiled gently. And you were brave enough to take the first step. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sky. Somewhere far beyond those stars, Earth waited. But here on a world that had once seen humanity as weak, James had earned something more powerful than victory. Respect. Inside the throne room, Queen Thalara watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable. She had seen the way her daughter looked at the human, not with suspicion, but with admiration. She wondered what destiny might be shaping between them, and whether it would strengthen her empire or change it forever. For now, she said nothing. She only whispered to herself, "The stars are shifting. Perhaps this is only the beginning." The days that followed the capture of Commander Serac were tense. Although the immediate threat of the Obsidian Guard had been stopped, Queen Thalara knew the unrest in her empire would not disappear overnight. Rumors of disloyalty and human influence circulated quietly among officials, and the Queen's advisors whispered that her daughter had grown too fond of the human ambassador. The thought of it unsettled her more than any rebellion. One morning she summoned Princess Lysera to the royal chamber. The hall was large and austere, filled with polished crystal and softly glowing symbols on the walls. The Queen's eyes were sharp as she studied her daughter. "Lysera," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Your association with Captain James Ralston has grown too visible. You openly guided him during the Obsidian Guard incident. You have shared knowledge that is meant for our people alone. Do you understand the danger of this?" Lysera met her mother's gaze without hesitation. "I understand, Mother. But James helped us protect the Empire. He did not act for himself, only to save lives. He deserves recognition." The Queen's lips pressed together in thought. She had always believed that loyalty and strength were shown through obedience to the Empire first. But her daughter's words held a quiet power. Lysera spoke not with defiance but with reason and sincerity. "Recognition can wait," the Queen said finally. "But trust must be measured. You must choose carefully whom you call your allies." Lysera nodded. "I will, Mother. But I believe humanity can be an ally worth trusting." The Queen's gaze softened slightly, though she did not show it openly. She motioned for her daughter to leave, and Lysera departed with a measured step, her thoughts racing. She knew the Queen was testing her, and she also knew her own feelings for the human had grown stronger. There was something admirable about his quiet determination and unshakable calm. Later that day, Lysera found James in the palace library, a massive space filled with glowing archives and holographic displays. He was studying maps of the Zelrai star systems and ancient texts about their history. "You have been busy," Lysera said softly, approaching him. James looked up and smiled. "I'm trying to understand the world I've entered. There is much to learn and very little time." She moved closer, standing beside him. "You've proven yourself already, James. You faced the trials, helped protect the city, and showed courage beyond what many of us believed humans could have." James shrugged modestly. "I do what anyone would do in my place." "No," she said quietly. "You do more. You act not because it is required, but because you choose to. That is what makes you different." James met her eyes. "I only hope my actions are enough to build trust, not just admiration." Lysera smiled faintly. "They are enough for me." Their moment was interrupted when the palace sensors detected unusual activity near the outskirts of the city. Alarms were raised, and scouts reported that a small fleet of ships disguised as merchant vessels had entered Zelrai space. The Queen called an emergency council, and both Lysera and James were summoned. In the council chamber, the Queen's advisors debated fiercely about what to do. Some urged an immediate strike. Others suggested diplomacy. The Queen listened quietly, weighing every argument. Finally, she spoke. "We cannot allow an unknown force to approach our city without investigation. Captain James, you will accompany Princess Lysera to assess the situation. You have already proven your ability to act quickly and wisely. Use that judgment now." James bowed respectfully. "I understand, Your Majesty." Lysera glanced at him. "This may be more dangerous than the Obsidian Guard, but we'll face it together." The two of them boarded a swift scout vessel, gliding through the city gates and into the dark expanse of space. The distant ships shimmered like silver shadows against the starry void. James studied their formation. "They are not organized like a military fleet," he observed. "They move in a way that suggests caution almost." "Curiosity," Lysera frowned. "Perhaps they are traders or explorers like you claimed humans can be. But we cannot risk guessing." As they approached, they detected faint energy signatures that suggested non-lethal weapons and scanning devices. James's mind worked quickly, analyzing the readings. They may be testing defenses, gathering information rather than planning attack. Lysera considered this. If that is true, we need to meet them on neutral terms. If they see us as aggressive, the situation could escalate. They activated their communication channels, sending a calm message identifying themselves as representatives of the Zelrai Empire. Moments later, a voice responded in an unfamiliar dialect, but James's translator quickly adapted. "We mean no harm," the voice said. "We have been sent to observe your civilization and learn." Lysera studied the message carefully. "Observation. That is acceptable. We must ensure it stays peaceful." James nodded. "Sometimes understanding begins with a conversation, not confrontation." The other ships adjusted their course to allow Lysera and James to approach. The human ambassador noted their design. Sleek, unfamiliar materials and markings that suggested a civilization that valued knowledge and exploration. "You see?" he said quietly. "Not every encounter in the stars needs to be a battle." Lysera smiled faintly. "You continue to surprise me." The next few hours were spent in careful negotiation and mutual assessment. James and Lysera shared information about their cities, culture, and defense protocols without revealing sensitive secrets. In return, the observing fleet shared insights about their exploration missions and the value they placed on peaceful cooperation. By the time the encounter ended, both parties had gained trust, if not full friendship. When they returned to Zelrai Prime, the Queen awaited them in her private chamber. "Report," she commanded, her voice calm but expectant. Lysera stepped forward. "They are explorers, Your Majesty. They came to observe, not to attack." Captain James managed the communication with skill and patience. "They are willing to share knowledge, provided we remain transparent and respectful." The Queen studied James. "You have demonstrated courage and wisdom once more. My daughter has learned from you, and so have I. Perhaps humanity can be more than I feared." James bowed. "I am honored, Your Majesty. I will continue to act in the service of peace and trust between our worlds." That evening, Lysera and James walked once more through the palace gardens. The soft glow of the plants and the calm night air offered a moment of peace. "You handled that well," Lysera said. "Your presence changes the way people think. Even my mother begins to see that humans are more than outsiders." James looked at the stars. "It is not me alone. It is the willingness of both sides to listen and learn. That is what makes peace possible." Lysera turned to him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the gardens. "I have never met anyone like you. You are brave, patient, and honest. That is rare even among my people." James smiled faintly, humbled. "I only try to do what is right." Lysera's expression grew serious. "And yet, in doing what is right, you have inspired many, including me. I have begun to believe that strength is not only in power or skill, but in courage, choice, and understanding." He nodded. "Perhaps that is what the future of our worlds should be built upon." In the shadows of the palace, unseen by them, the Queen observed quietly. She understood now that her daughter's choice to trust the human was not a mistake. The human ambassador had shown that courage, loyalty, and wisdom could coexist in a single being, even one so different from her own kind. The Queen's heart, though measured and careful, allowed herself a faint acknowledgement of pride, not in her daughter alone, but in the possibilities that lay ahead. As night settled over the city, Lysera and James remained in the gardens, speaking softly about the stars, their homes, and what could be achieved when different worlds chose to understand one another. For the first time in generations, the palace was filled not with whispers of fear, but with hope, and in that hope a new chapter for both humanity and the Zelrai began to take shape. The days after the defeat of the Obsidian Guard were quieter than the palace had known in years, but the calm did not feel complete. The citizens of Zelrai Prime whispered cautiously about the human who had earned the respect of the Queen and her daughter. In the markets, children pointed toward James when he walked through the streets, curious and fascinated by the strange human who had not only survived the trials but had helped protect their city. Queen Thalara observed all of this carefully. Her daughter had returned from the mission with both intelligence about the hidden rebellion and with a newfound trust in James. The Queen knew that her empire could not advance if it remained afraid of outsiders. She had watched her daughter grow, but she also realized that this human had brought something extraordinary, an example of courage, judgment, and loyalty that transcended the walls of Zelrai tradition. In the royal chamber, the Queen spoke quietly to her advisors. "The human has proven himself beyond expectation. The princess has learned much from him. Perhaps it is time we consider new ways, new alliances if the empire is to remain strong." Her advisors murmured uneasily. Change had always been feared among them. Yet the Queen's voice was steady, her decision clear. "I will not turn away from opportunity out of fear. The future is too important. Meanwhile, James continued his work with Lysera. They visited laboratories, training halls, and council chambers, learning together and planning improvements for both defense and diplomacy. Lysera began to see that strength was not measured by size or power alone, but by wisdom, courage, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. James, too, learned from her about patience, strategy, and the careful balance of tradition and progress. One evening, they returned to the palace gardens. The light of the bioluminescent plants shimmered across their faces, and the soft hum of the city below created a peaceful rhythm. Lysera stopped walking and looked at James. "You have changed more than this city," she said softly. "You have changed me. I see strength differently now. Courage is not only fighting or winning, it is choosing to act with honor, even when the outcome is uncertain." James looked at her, touched by the sincerity in her voice. "You already had that courage inside you. I only showed you that someone from another world could share it." She smiled faintly. "And yet you make it seem simple, human. It is not simple here. There are expectations, traditions, duties. You must weigh every step carefully." "I understand," he said. "But I believe that courage and understanding often outweigh tradition when the future is at stake." Lysera looked at him with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. "You risked everything to help us. You put yourself in danger for people who barely knew you." James's expression was calm but serious, because the right choice is not always the safe choice, and sometimes the smallest action can change the course of history. Her gaze softened. "You have already changed history. You've earned the respect of my mother, my people, and of me." James's eyes met hers, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The wind in the crystal gardens carried no words, yet it felt full of meaning. Lysera's heart raced with something she could not name, but the admiration she felt for this human was stronger than she had expected. The next morning, the Queen summoned them both. Her expression was stern, though her eyes carried a hint of pride. "Captain James Ralston, Princess Lysera, you have both acted with honor, courage, and intelligence. You have defended the Empire and opened new doors for diplomacy. But there is one more matter." Lysera straightened. "Mother?" The Queen's gaze shifted from her daughter to James. "The Empire has long been cautious of outsiders. Yet you, human, have proven yourself to be a warrior not only of strength but of spirit. Your actions have saved lives and strengthened bonds. You have earned your place here if you are willing." James felt a mixture of surprise and humility. "Your Majesty, I am honored. My home is Earth and my duty is to my people, but I will do all I can to help your empire and strengthen the trust between our worlds." The Queen nodded. "Then you will remain, not as a guest but as a representative, a bridge between Zelrai and humanity. Your presence will help guide our people toward understanding and cooperation." Lysera stepped forward, her voice steady and confident. "My mother is wise and I will support her decision."
"Captain James."
"You are more than a guest here. You are my warrior." The words echoed across the chamber. James looked at her, understanding the depth of her meaning. It was not just honor or recognition, it was trust, respect, and a bond that transcended their different worlds. From that moment, James's role changed. He became a permanent part of the palace's council, working alongside Lysera and other advisors to develop policies, improve defenses, and expand diplomatic relations. He trained young Zelrai in both strategy and cooperation, showing them that courage and loyalty could take many forms. Together, James and Lysera faced challenges, both political and practical. They rebuilt parts of the fleet damaged by the Obsidian Guard, implemented new training programs, and created alliances with neighboring star systems. Every decision was guided by trust and careful judgment. The people began to see that a human could be both wise and brave, and that fear of the unknown could be replaced by hope and understanding. One evening, as the twin moons of Zelrai Prime rose over the city, James and Lysera walked along the highest terrace of the palace. The lights of the city shimmered below them, and the stars above stretched endlessly into space. "You have changed everything," Lysera said quietly. "Not just the city, not just the council, but the way people think. You've made them believe in more than fear." James smiled softly. "And you have shown me the strength of your people. Without your guidance, your courage, and your willingness to trust, none of this would have been possible." Lysera looked up at the stars. "Do you think humans and Zelrai will ever be equals?" "I believe we can," James said. but it will take patience, understanding, and trust. One action at a time, one choice at a time. She smiled, finally letting herself feel the hope that had grown quietly in her heart. Then we will take those steps together, my warrior. As the night deepened, the queen watched from the shadows, unseen but content. She had seen the bond that had formed between her daughter and the human. She understood that strength came in many forms, not only through power or conquest, but through courage, wisdom, and the willingness to stand together across worlds. The stars above shimmered with possibility. For the first time in generations, Zelrai Prime looked not only to the preservation of its traditions, but also to the promise of a future shared with another species. And somewhere in the quiet of the palace gardens, a human warrior and a princess of the empire stood side by side, ready to face that future together. The human ambassador had come as a visitor, as an outsider. He had faced trials, fought dangers, and proven himself in ways that no one could have predicted. Now he had earned not only respect, but a place in the hearts of those he had helped. And Lysera, the princess who had once doubted the value of outsiders, had found courage, friendship, and perhaps something more in him. The queen whispered softly to herself, watching the pair against the night sky. The galaxy is changing. Perhaps this human and my daughter are the beginning of something greater than any of us imagined. And with that, the palace fell into a peaceful quiet. The future of Zelrai Prime, and the bond between two worlds, beginning to shine as brightly as the stars above.